So last time we talked a little bit about growth mindset and the difference between growth mindset and fixed mindset. So that's not that I came up with. I showed you times. It's a great book. There's a chapter that specifically I can give you guys even the page number. Anyway, there's a chapter there for teachers and parents specifically. I feel like the chapter on parenting is actually very helpful even for those teachers who don't have kids, because it gives you insight on what could be being said at home that gets in the way of what we are trying to do with the kids, especially again when it's being compared like the fixed mindset versus growth mindset, and when you see signs of fixed mindset parenting, what we can do to at least mitigate the risk. If we won't fix everyone, that's just the law of life, but if we understand the signs, it's a little easier to override some of those patterns that kids fall into because of, again, toxic parenting, right? Which 80% of the time, maybe 90 is too big a number, but 80% of the time, these are not parents who are trying to do any harm. They just are very ill-equipped, and they say things that they heard themselves growing up, so just repeat the same things. B, because they're stressed out, so they lash out. And what we as parents sometimes don't understand or are not aware of, again, going back to self-awareness, which we talked about last week, the reality is that there's a lot that it can be said, and it's not the kids don't forget it as quickly as we wish they would. It stays in, and it's the same thing for teachers, right? Let me just, like I said earlier, see if I can. How do I make the faces move? Once again, here we have the differences between fixed mindset and growth mindset. In fixed mindset, the big picture idea is that everything is fixed, hence the term, right? So there's no changing your mindset, there's no changing your personality traits, there's no changing the way you learn and how much you can learn. Everything is very set in stone in fixed mindset teaching and parenting. So a few examples of things that people might say or think is failure is the limit of my abilities, meaning whenever a student fails, and if they have a predisposition for fixed mindset, what they think is there's no point in trying again. This is the limit. I failed, therefore I'm done. Which of course in growth mindset, conversely, you've got failure is an opportunity to grow. And that, like, one of the sayings that I use with my students is that failure is nothing to worry about, and in fact it's just the footprints that you leave behind on your way towards success. So you're going to have to fail a lot in order to get there, right? Each footprint that you leave on that sand is, yes, it's a moment of failure, but it's also an opportunity to sit down and reassess and, gather your troops and go at it again. So, it's instilling in them that mindset of fail faster, fail better, right? I've been talking a lot about that. Well, I've been talking a lot about that for many years with students, but also with teachers as of late, as I've embraced this new persona in the last 2 or 3 years, where I also talk to teachers a lot about teaching. And this is one of the things that some teachers, again, bringing this back to us, they are scared of putting the students in this uncomfortable position of failure. So they protect them from that, which I would advise against. What we need to prepare them is with coping mechanisms for when that happens, not if, for when that happens, because it will. It is what it is. You cannot play. A very practical example: we're teaching a student a song, and they play 15 wrong notes. Are we supposed to say like, great job, let's learn the next song, and and just reinforce that it's okay to play all the wrong notes? No, it's not okay. Now, is it the limit? That this is the balance, right? And I can tell you, it's it's an anecdote. It's something that happened to me. It's not science, but I have a student still whose default is it's not just fixed mindset. It's fixed mindset plus toxicity, right? Because that kid at 7 years old, he started taking drum lessons with me. If he heard the words, we need to work on X, Y, and Z, it would be a complete meltdown immediately. It was so toxic, his reaction to feedback, that it was very scary to look at someone so young and so incapable of hearing the words that wasn't perfect or anything within that realm. It was so scary, and so often I would come home, and he was for a while actually my last student of the week, and I would come home and just have this kid on my mind all the time and think like, not only try to navigate my own frustrations. We are human beings. It's perfectly normal for us to react to this stuff, especially if we are relatively empathic. Then we absorb a lot of that energy, which is not a bad thing as long as we know how to also then bounce back as teachers. But man, it was scary, and it took a long time, and I had to play games with him with flashcards. Like, unfortunately, I don't have them here because I left them at the academy. But I would have like I hand wrote like on a bunch of A4 sheets, like words like failure, and then I would just like flash it, and the game was, what does this mean? And then I would just constantly correct it. He would give me answers, and the rule was no thinking, just, and sometimes like one of the words was practice, another word was learning, failure, making mistakes, stuff like this. Right, I was leading him obviously to certain answers on purpose, and then he was like correcting those answers to shifting him towards a growth mindset, right? So, and then we would repeat the game like the week after, and he would remember, right? Like, oh, learning, enjoyable, because even though he didn't believe it, that's fine, and that's fine. But we need to sort of give them the script that they will eventually memorize. And just like anything that we learn on the instrument requires muscle memory, so does self-belief. Right? It requires repetition. It requires reinforcement. It requires always promoting when they show you signs that they are adopting that mindset. That's when you jump on it. Just like, and we can make the bridge. And I'm often very open about that with them. I make the bridge between uh, the things that they are successful at, and I ask them, how did you become successful at that? And then I relate that to what they're struggling with now, right? And often the answers are always the same, right? I became successful at playing football because we practice 4 times a week. And then I just give them that nod with the eyes wide open, right? Repetition. Uh, you didn't want to join the team and had a match that day. You guys had a preseason, and then there's practice 4 times a week, and then there's the match on weekends. One match, 4 practices. Do the math, right? And they start to see what are you on about, and they smile usually, and they go, okay, fine, I get it. I can't just show up here and want to be a rock star. Okay, I guess I get it. And that's the storytelling element is very important. So to continue, fixed mindset. Another example. I'm either good at it or I'm not. Now I'll share with you yet another story. By the way, because I don't intend to hide the craft as to how I do things with you guys, which I do with the students. I hide most of it. Um, I have another story of this was a grandparent. Um, again, unknowingly, he was saying terrible things to his grandkid. who was also my student, right? And in a supportive way, he would say things like, "Oh, so how is he getting on with the lessons?" And I say, "Ah, very well. We made tons of progress today. We learned this, blah blah blah." And he would look at him, pat him on his head, and be like, "Ah, we'll see what happens, won't we?" I'm like, what are you saying? I just told you that the lesson was awesome. And he was, right? And so absolutely a kind of I'm either good at it or I'm not sort of attitude towards his child, which was again a projection. He believes, he sees himself like that, therefore his grandkid must be the same. We'll see if he's got any talent. That poisonous word, talent. Um, it's a terrible word that should be banned from all sorts of dictionaries. And we should replace it with the word patience, right? So when someone looks at a musician on stage, especially people who don't play, obviously, and I'm not referring to students, but like their parents who don't play anything, right? But then they support them, but then they have this thing of like, maybe he's not so talented. Oh, maybe this is just for fun. I mean, I don't expect him to be any good at it. Like, and what they don't see is that everything that they're saying in the head of the child is not is transferable to everything they do. Do I want all my students to be professional drummers? No, I don't want neither that, this nor that. I have no wants. What I want is for them to learn those skills that we are talking about here today, right? The skill to learn, the skill to believe that they can learn, the skill to power through difficulties, because that's going to be transferable then in their future life. If they're studying engineering, which couldn't be farther away from being a musician, I guess, like at least at a superficial level, but they will have that resilience, they will have that stamina, and hopefully there will be a glimpse of our voices in their heads when the difficulties arise. They'll have those thoughts of like, failure is just the footprints that you leave behind on your way towards success. Bam, let's go. Right, and that's what we're trying to do here. So one more here. In a fixed mindset, I don't like to be challenged. So that goes back to that first story I told you about, that kid who just completely melted down. And then conversely, we've got in growth mindset, my effort and attitude determine my abilities. Your skill set is determined by what you do. So it can be summed up like this: you are what you do. If you want to be something, like anything at all, like if you want to be more patient, do patience. I was fight. That's the self-awareness that is needed once again, right? If you want to be more focused, do focus. And by doing focus, I mean like when in that moment where you're thinking of doing something else, catch yourself, or allow someone else to catch you, right? Which is what we do for them. Like, hey, slow down. Like I've got a student now, he's 60 years old. He simply cannot, and I tell him off every single week, cannot practice slowly. There's a lot of ego there and bravado in the practice. And then he comes a week later and like, Joe, I was trying to do this, but I can't connect those two exercises. And now, okay, show me. He starts playing it, and I 5 seconds into it, I raise my hand. All right, we're good. It's too fast, Chris. Slow down, right? Because it's again a sort of fixed mindset in a way, right? He just wants the final result, or else there's no point. There's no enjoyment of the process. For them to struggle means to fail. Come on, I'm not being able to do this properly. And it's again, I'll give you guys another line that I use a lot with them. Don't compare your behind the scenes with someone else's highlights. Right? You're listening to a record or you're watching YouTube videos that have been edited to oblivion, and you're like, well, that's how I practice then. All the drum fills, all the gospel chops, all the shredding. Like, hey, bro, no. Just first learn how to grab the pick. But that's the growth mindset. Once again, like enjoying the process. Okay, so Um, moving on. Here I will introduce the other concept that we will talk about today, which is NLP. That stands for Neuro Linguistic Programming. So that's to do two things simultaneously. One is to identify first to identify words or phrases that the student uses that you see as toxic to that student's progress and self-belief and self-esteem, as whatever. So first, that identification is very important, and the NLP process is a slow one. So we need to be patient also as teachers, because we will not change anyone's mind in one lesson. As much as we wish to, it takes time, and we need to be cautious, because if we become just too in their faces, they will just back off and be like, whoa, 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 you're scaring me, right? Even if they don't say it, they will feel very exposed, and they will most likely just bail on you. So what you want to do is like first identify those words, and then slowly you suggest new words, right? So and it depends on the student you're dealing with, but usually like, well, let's try. I don't know if I said this last week, but one thing that I say to my kid a lot, he's 4 years old, and whenever if he talks back, or if he says something without asks for something without saying please, stuff like this, I don't quote unquote tell him off. I have one sentence that he already knows what it means. That's the conditioning process. I just ask, can we say that better? And that's the mindset shift. It's not a don't say that, it's a say it better. It's a completely different angle. And everything about NLP is semantics. Everything, right? It's got nothing to do with intention, because you might have the same intention with both sentences, but saying it differently enters differently in their system, right? And that's often what, again, going back to parents, what they don't really connect to. They think, well, my intentions are good. Okay, good for you, but how's that working out? I'm glad you have good intentions, but if they're not processing the information in the most effective, efficient way and the effective way, yeah, change the way you're saying it. It's not them, that being your kids or your students, who need to adapt to the way you say things. It's just not. So, for example, what can you say just to, I know that I said this last week already, so I'll just go quickly through it. What can you say when a student fails in order to promote that growth mindset versus making them feel like, they just can't do it? You can say, this is not a test, and I know that you've put the effort in. Okay, I'm going to pause already right there. The effort is a key word here. Students need to appreciate the process and the effort, so we need to value that a lot. Right? When they put the effort in, that's to be praised. That's not to be to be overlooked. And this is something that I'm sure those who know me have heard me say this sickening amount of times. Life is long. I'm very much against that idea of life is short. That's nonsense. It's only short if you're wasting your days. If you're not, it's really long. I mean, most of us will be here for 90 years. If you think of it, it's a long time. And I'm proud of the fact that you persisted even when it was stressful. That sentence right there, even when it was stressful, I say those things to students so they know that I see them. Meaning, I don't need them to tell me that it's stressful. Even if they're putting it on the whole like, yeah, I get it. A lot of students do that kind of shruggy attitude. You just sort of ignore that, so to speak, and you're like, I know it was stressful. And that in that moment, because of course it was, right? It's always stressful to learn, and they'll realize, oh, he understands me. He knows that it was stressful. Okay, cool. And they will bring that guard down a bit. Then you can remind them that failure is part of the process, like I said earlier. And it only means that you haven't earned the win yet. Again, the analogy with sports, right? If a team loses the game, because the other team was better. End of, right? Like, I'm sure there's outlier situations, blah, 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 but, rule of thumb, that's what happened. The other team played better. In the case of learning, really what's happening is that the exercise won. Fine, that happens. That's fine. We just need to overcome that and assess what went wrong, what didn't go, what didn't go wrong, what's to keep, what's to ditch, and boom, get back in and then try again. Give them clear instructions as to how they can get there, whilst also allowing room for their own personal choices, which might include wanting to change paths, right? I've had students who were taking drum lessons and then they decided, I want to try the guitar. Awesome. Keep trying things. Absolutely. Just be wary of the motivations behind such decisions. For example, if they say, I just want to quit because of fixed mindset problems, instead of, oh, because I'm more stimulated by something else, there are two different motivations. And the first one, probably we should address. The second one, we should just support and let them get on with it, right? Teach them better ways, not only of doing things, but of how they see and express themselves after failure. NLP once again, right? If they are really hard on themselves, we need to jump in there and be like, hey, buddy, it's fine. You know how many times I failed? In fact, you know what? I was just failing a ton whilst we were doing our warm-up. I just got better at hiding it. And they, like they smile and they laugh. And again, that anxiety associated to overexposure that they feel subsides, at least, even if not totally, just for a bit. I showed you guys this last week, things to say versus things, or things not to say versus what to say instead. I'm not going to go through it again. We've done this. Okay, and then bottom line, that's the most important thing. Always praise effort and work ethic, not natural talent or gifts. Saying things like, oh, you're so talented. No, let's get rid of all that. The three mindsets of practice. This is a really important one for us teachers to help our students with. Okay? There are three zones when it comes to practice, mindset-wise. The zone where the student is so anxious, so on our left there, that they can't even focus. The emotional state is so heightened because it could be out of their own emotional predispositions, again, like parenting, blah, 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 but it could also be the teacher. We could be pushing them too fast too soon. We could be giving them tempos, for example, for them to play at, it's just too fast. Or an exercise that is just too difficult, that needs to be broken down a little bit more, etc., right? That's the anxiety zone. That's to be avoided, right? Because again, heightened emotional states completely compromise memory, for example. Your memory just becomes that. That's why people block out trauma. Because memory and emotional heightened states, they clash. So they need to be in a zone, but not a zone of heightened states of anxiety. So for instance, just to make it more personal again, I don't know, Eddie, can you unmute your microphone just so I can ask you a question?
Yes.
Thank you. So I don't know if you recall, a few weeks back we were talking about, just for context for the other people listening, Eddie works for My Music Academy, so this is why I'm going to ask him this question directly, so he's part of the team. A few weeks ago we were talking about one of your lessons. I'm not going to mention any names, but and I told you, like, the way you chose the tempo might be a little dangerous for the student, because you kind of, we were talking about, like, we can't just choose a tempo, and I suggested to you, I don't know if you recall, but I'm going to say it again just for everyone. I suggest to you that you let the student just play it. Free floating tempo, doesn't matter. Whilst they're still learning it. Just let them play. And once it starts to roll, starts to feel good, even though it's the student's tempo, we, the teacher, grab a metronome and use the tap tempo features. Or if we are old school, you look at your clock, at your watch, right? And you go like, that's 30 BPM. And that's the tempo that you give them to start at, then with the metronome. Versus, I think a good starting tempo is 60 BPM. when the student naturally was playing that at 35. You're putting that student immediately in anxiety mode as soon as they hear the metronome. They're like, oh shit. Like, this is really fast, right? And they won't be able to go. Now they're feeling stressed out. They're trying to keep up with it. It's just not going to go anywhere. And you're going to go like, oh yeah, it's okay. You just spend your week practicing this. You know what's going to happen? They're going to spend 10 minutes trying and then 6 days not touching the guitar. It's like,
Yeah.
nope, I don't want anything to do with this. This is way out of... and, you know, a lot of students don't know how to express that. They won't be able to tell you, you know, teacher, I think it's too fast. No, they'll just assume, I think I'm too slow. And that's the problem. As soon as they think, I think I'm too slow for what my teacher expects from me, they give up. So we need to meet them where they are and take them to where we want them to be. So let me skip the comfort zone and talk about the challenge zone. So the challenge zone is where, in fact, let me actually address the comfort zone. So the comfort zone would be an area where they would probably be too comfortable. They're just feeling a little lazy. It feels too easy. It's not really pushing them anywhere. And that's sometimes the case with teachers who tend to want to please their students more than challenge them. So they give them really easy peasy kind of pieces, and they, you know, they just let, like when a student goes like, I don't want to play this song, I want to play that song. And we know it's not the song they should be playing. Perfect example, grade exams. Why should a grade 2 student be doing a grade 1 exam? Makes no sense. If we can spend 6 months with them preparing them for the exam, my approach with exams with parents is that don't give me 9 months and we will get them to the next level. I don't want to prepare them for the exam for the level where he's at now. What's the point in that? If he's now today a grade 2 student by my standards, whatever that means, let's go for grade 3 and have that as our next 9-month long goal. That is what I would call the challenge zone. Right? We'll find where the comfort zone is and push them gently into that next area where they feel like, ooh, this is burning a bit, but it's not completely melting them down, right? Which would be the anxiety. It's putting them in, lukewarm water, not boiling water. Right? So that's how I would decide upon which kind of exercises I should be teaching and how fast, whatever. Right? So I would see the student, practice whatever I'm, offering him or her, and then my own assessment is where in these 3 zones is the student right now, and help him or her get out of there. Right? If it's the comfort zone, all right, let's push a little bit. If it's the anxiety zone, ooh, let's bring it down a touch. Right? Until we find that sweet spot of challenge. Challenge can be seen as if the student can play it for 90 seconds without major issues or meltdowns, but then it starts to wobble, you know you're in the challenge zone. And that 90-second rule, by the way, has a reason. The brain has this way of working where if you expose a student to new information, what's working is mainly your prefrontal cortex in terms of acquiring that information from an intellectual standpoint. Of course, there's motor functions that are working to make the fingers move, we get that. But what's absorbing the information intellectually is your prefrontal cortex. Now, once it's repetitive, which most of the time that's what we offer them, repetitive patterns, the brain assumes, hold on, this is always the same thing, so it should be my memory's job to do this. So it tries to send that information back to the memory, or to kinesthetic memory especially, where we lodge walking and brushing your teeth and anything that is muscle memory based, right? What happens obviously is that once the brain tries to do that, to free up the prefrontal cortex so it can deal with actual more relevant things, or so the brain thinks that it should be doing that, it crashes because it's not in the muscle memory, is it? It's a new exercise. And that's when the 90, and you guys can test this with your students. Put them in a comfortable tempo, repeating something that they can do it, and see how often, around the 80 to 100 second mark, they suddenly crash. It's extremely fascinating. Right? You're watching someone get it, they get it, they get it, and then complete meltdown. And they look at me like, "Oh, I just had it." Yep, that's your brain trying to free up the prefrontal cortex. And I tell them why that happens. And then it ends up being a bit of a competition. See if we can go on for 110 seconds before the brain crashes. 120 seconds before the brain crash, right? We kind of play that competition between your prefrontal cortex and your muscle memory, which is a fun game to play. But there you go. So let's get into some of the tactics. So, for example, organizing practice and helping students doing this. How to help them organize practice. I talked to Eddie about this recently as well, and to break down the practice and the teaching as well into 3 sections. So the first section would be the understanding phase. So just to make it more interactive, Eddie, would you be willing to describe what you've understood of the understanding phase?
Yes. The understanding phase.
Let me just pause you there for a second, just to say something quickly. Sorry.
Yeah.
This that I just asked you, Eddie, to do is the understanding phase.
Exactly.
It always ends with me asking my students, "Can you explain this back to me?"
Mm-hmm.
So go on.
Yes. Well, after we have given a clear information of what are we to cover with examples and making sure they understand, we go here to this part of the pyramid where they have to sort of show us what are we to do or what are we to learn. So they're going to describe. So what I usually tell them is like, okay, now imagine you're teaching me this. How would you describe it? And I ask them, and also we leave them a little gap of time, and we say, if you don't understand, just think of a question, and I will happily answer it.
Okay, so I'll pause and I'll it's all fine. Let's complete a little bit of that picture there. So I also subdivide the understanding phase into 5 sub-steps. They can be 4, they can be 6. It's up to you, I guess. I wouldn't say less than 4 is probably a bit too vague for the students. What those 5 sub-steps would be change depending on the instrument you're teaching, but it is to categorize each element that the student must understand, not be able to play yet, that's fine, but understand in order to be equipped to then tackle the play. So, for example, I'm going to use, I think I gave you those 5 steps when we talked about.
I have them here, so I can.
You do? So please.
Yeah, I can talk about them.
Please,
so
yes.
number 1, it's what's the subdivision?
Subdivision. So, how do we go about counting this?
Counting, exactly.
Yeah.
Number 2, what's the melody? So what are the notes? Number 3, rhythm.
What's the rhythm? Yeah. When do we play those notes? And by the way, again, for us teachers, give them the umbrella idea and then ask another question rephrasing what we're asking for. So, for example, what's the subdivision? I then immediately follow up with, how do we go about counting this? 2 questions to really complete the picture. What's the melody? Which notes are we playing? On the fretboard, on the piano, whatever. What's the rhythm? When do we play those notes? So I'm constantly reinforcing the instruction. So carry on, please. So what's the rhythm? When do we play those notes? Yes?
Exactly. The number 4 is fingering.
Fingering, yeah. Which finger plays each note?
Exactly. Or patterns, like you said before, we tend to use patterns. So fingerings, patterns on the neck.
I would just say which finger plays each note.
Okay. So more simple. Okay.
Just bam, straight to the point. Very like, this is what this is.
Yes, way better. And number 5, dynamics.
Dynamics, which would translate to
The intensity that we play.
each note. That's it.
Exactly.
And I make it so simple that they can and then teach it back to me, right? So dynamics, what's the volume of each note? That's it.
Exactly.
So I always, in a way, assume, and not in a dismissive way, but assume that the student doesn't have to remember all those terms like subdivision. So that I translate what that means. Okay, cool. So that's just the understanding phase. So, and then I've got these sort of like sentences, key sentences that the student must be able to say, um, besides being able to answer all those 5 questions. What's the subdivision? 16th notes and 8th notes. So, what's the melody? It's C, G, blah, 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 blah. What's the rhythm? Right, you get it. They have to answer all those 5 questions. So now they are almost in self-teaching mode. And then I ask them, okay, for us to know if we can go up to the knowledge phase, can you confidently say, I understand this? And that's all we need them to prove to us, that they understand it. They don't have to be able to play it yet. In fact, within that understanding phase, they have no business even touching the instrument. Because they don't know what they're meant to be doing. And if they try to play their way into understanding something, muscle memory will kick in, and all the old crap that they already know will show up, not the new stuff. So it can't be a kinesthetic approach to understanding things intellectually. Say that they've managed to answer all 5 questions. Check. We go up to knowledge. So do you want to help us with the knowledge phase, Andy?
Yes. So the knowledge, uh, we like make sure they understood, and then allows us to play free tempo, like you said
Yeah.
before, without just forcing them. We say, okay, let's play at free tempo,
Yeah.
and then count the subdivision out loud. It's like guiding them by baby steps, little by little.
Yeah.
And also something really important you said, it's about singing the melody
Yeah.
without the use of the instrument. If they have the melody in their heads, then it's a win-win situation because they eventually will be able to play it. The next one is play to metronome. So then after all these steps, we start incorporating the metronome. And we have the next one, practice 2 minutes. So this will be, I would say, just like a free practice, 2 minutes, friendly practice.
Yeah.
And number 6, by then we should know, the difficult parts or easy parts that they have played. So
Yeah.
we break it up into chunks. We say, okay, so let's break it up into little chunks and progress from there.
Okay, so I would now sum it up by saying the knowledge phase, and I called it the knowledge phase because that's when you actually get to know the thing, right? So I could also translate that, and I often do again with my students, to the practice phase. This is when you actually now get to grab the pick and the guitar. Let's go. Let's try to do it. I know what I'm supposed to be doing. I've answered those 5 questions in the understanding phase. Let's get to the practice. And then, yes, free floating tempo to start with. Let's just let them explore. And it gets to a point that we can steer them away from a mistake or whatever, but just let them find their way through it with our guidance, obviously. And then, yes, we introduce the metronome. By the way, the introduction of the metronome should also be explained to the students why we use metronome. There's 2 factors that I always use. One is the obvious one, timekeeping, but the other one is it's yet another tool to track your progress. So if on Monday you're capable of playing that at 57 BPM, there is no reason as to why on Tuesday you should start at 82, right? And that's what's going to happen if they're just going by gut. It's just going to be all over the shop. It depends on their mood. One day is going to be 37, the next day is going to be 101, and it's all over the shop. And the metronome gives you also that clear awareness and vision, like, oh, I'm progressing. It's a very kind of real thing. We look at numbers, right? Like the humans are wired to look at these little reward systems, right? As benefit, like, oh, I'm playing faster. Even if it's 2 BPM, it's a victory. But if it's just perception based, they might actually be playing faster and not know. So there's also that element there to the metronome. Okay, so once the student is capable of performing the exercise consistently at the standard and goals that we established, what happens next, Eddie?
Yes, the next phase is the application. So then we,
Just to say that most of the time, students end up stopping at knowledge.
yes,
Like once they can play something, that's when they go like, got it, right? And they just move on mentally. And that's what causes so many times students to know how to play a paradiddle and never for the life of them use that as a drum fill or a groove. What's that about? It's that last chunk at the end, the application one. So proceed, please. Sorry for interrupting.
no, it's okay. Yeah, like most of the times, like you said, when we learn, we just say, "Oh, I can do it," and you take it for granted, and we don't apply it.
Yeah,
So now this is very important, the application. So to incorporate this new knowledge into music, so play a piece and encourage them to use, for example, in your case, no, the drum.
I wouldn't encourage them in the sense that just to make it very clear. For me, it's very structured. So it's not a give it a go, try to use your paradiddle. It is, for example, if that's what they're learning and they've acquired the knowledge, so to speak, of the paradiddle, they now have some muscle memory of it. Sound, that's awesome. First, assess at what tempo they're playing it at, right? So let's say 90 BPM. So the song that they will play and apply that to has to be 90 BPM. Again, we don't want to throw them a curveball. Be like, try this song, and it's 130, and then they'll fail, and it's not their fault, and they will feel like, oh, I'm rubbish, and that's not their fault. So 90 BPM, and that's easy to find nowadays. Backing track, 90 BPM, enter, right? Nice and easy. And then I also structured the exercise, so it's not try to use the parody. Now, it's we're gonna play 3 bars of groove, and you're gonna play me 1 bar of paradiddle in 16th notes on the snare drum. Go. That's it. It's very structured. So I don't want them to be like now it's just gonna freeze, right? We need to give them exactly the route, right? So they can then start to free themselves up from all the rules, if you will, the structure, and they start to take liberties, and that's fine. But even that process of taking liberties, I make it quite step by step. For instance, we run through the song at 90 BPM, paradiddle on the snare drum, 1 bar, cool. So now we're talking about 4 bar cycles. I explained them why it's a 4 bar cycle. In music, that's a common structure for resolution and completion. Okay, cool. Let's now try the same structure. We won't change a thing, but the accents of the paradiddle, let's move the right hand accents to the floor tom, left hand accents to the high tom. All right, it's just incorporating some movement now. Just one little nuance that's been added. And then this, and then that, and then you just kind of allow them to climb that ladder safely. You don't just throw them like, into the pit with lions and be like, all right, figure it out. So that's my take on application, and help them see how they then at home can practice applying these things before they are expected to say in band context or whatever. Right? Okay, so that would be the pyramid of mastery. When to stop teaching, we talked about this last week. I talked about sharing stories about yourselves, talked about watching videos, listening to music, doing a little bit of commentary on music. I've watched uh, dozens of documentaries with my students in lessons, because it's all part of that universe of learning, right? It doesn't have to always be scales. Let's work on your side breathing. Uh, I'm all into that, but it's not the end all be all. Stop teaching your past self. This is a big one for teachers because so many teachers out there are fantastic teachers and the one style. They can only teach students efficiently, and they luck out every now and then because they find a match. But all the other students who learn differently from the way the teacher, learns slash teaches, there's a clash. Say the teacher, as a student back in the day, is more of a kinesthetic learner. I'm a doer. Just give me the thing. I'll do it. I'll figure it out. And then you're teaching a student who's a read writer. That would be me. I need to see the notes. I need to take notes. I need to slow it down in my head so I can see the big picture. If you're showing me a drum fill, by default, I'll just tune out. But if you write it for me, I'll play it in one go. Right? That doesn't mean that, say, for example, a student with more, say, an oral approach to learning, meaning can learn very easily by ear. That doesn't mean that they can't develop the read-write skills of transcribing things. That just means that this is the way in. And then you get into the other stuff, right? And that as the teacher, we need to assess that on the fly. By what I do is I do all of them at once. My first explanation has all of it. I write the notes on the board. I play it for them. So now I've done this. I ask them to write it down, and they don't have to understand it. I literally say to them, just copy it. As if you're just drawing a portrait of what I wrote there. Just try to copy it. Exactly what you see. It doesn't have to make sense. Don't worry about it. And then I play it, which feeds this, and then we play it together. One step at a time. We know how to do this stuff, and then I see at which point kind of the light bulb the light bulb went on. Right? Sometimes it's as soon as I write on the board, I can see that they're like, you get the body language. They're nodding. They look very into it. They're looking at the notes attentively. Sometimes it's when you play, you see like, oh, that moment of the eyebrows just go up and you see, okay, this is the way in with this guy. He's more of an oral guy. But now you've already made the connection there between those two. So that let's not overlook that the fact that because you have the notes on the board, now you played it and it clicked. The brain also clicked with the read-write element. And it merged those two. When I see those notes, it makes that sound. It's just like learning how to read, right? We learn how to read English. We already know how to speak English if you're an English native speaker. Until someone tells you that the letter A, that drawing, you say A, for you it's just a drawing. Like it's a 3 lines. Like it doesn't make any sense. Someone's got to tell you, yeah, when you see that, you say A. But if you see that next to a page, you say interesting. And that's the same thing with music, right? So bottom line is we need to make sure that we connect and identify as quickly as possible how that student learns and not try to push your own agenda as to, oh, that works for me. Surely it's got to work for you. Again, it relates back to fixed mindset stuff. If it works for me, it's got to work for you. That's a fixed mindset trait. I had a teacher who was very much like this. He just wouldn't pick up on the fact that, bro, I don't, like by the time you're playing the 6th note of that drum fill, I've forgotten what the second one was. Like it just doesn't go in like that. And he just wouldn't pick up on it. And he had this kind of vision of me as like, hey, it's not very fast, is he? And I'm like, I just don't learn like that. It just doesn't go in like that. So, the next one, right? I can change slides. Oops. Hold on, sorry. The computer is losing his marbles. All right. Good. Next one. There we go. Okay. Energy matching. So when you have a situation in the classroom where the energies are clashing and you feel like the most common example, right? The student is just too hyped. It's just all over the shop, right? Especially if it's a younger student, super high energy, wants to play around, wants to talk, blah, blah, blah. It's fine to imitate that for a while. And we talked about this last week or 2 weeks ago. With like where you match them and then you slowly bring him down with you, right? And I gave you guys the example of the scene at the restaurant where if you start to imitate someone who's sat at a table across you and not and they ideally they don't really see you doing it, but just they're picking up on it because we all do that, right? We have peripheral vision for a reason. We're picking up on all sorts of things that we're not necessarily paying attention to. Um, and then like if whenever they grab a napkin, you grab a napkin, they take a bite, you take a bite, they take a sip of wine, you take a sip of wine, and then you flip it and you grab the napkin, you'll see them grab the napkin. And it's a very interesting thing that it's got to do with a part of our brains that identifies behavior so we can fit in. It's the tribal thinking in us, right? So that's why people yawn when people yawn. It's the same thing. It's that it's called the those near that section of your brain. I forget now the actual technical term, but the layman term is mirror neurons, right? So these are a section of your brain that is just wired to identify what everyone else is doing, so you can join them all and not be outcast, right? Like as the guy who needs to go and leave the tribe. Like you don't belong here, and we know what that leads to: geniuses and criminals. So, by the way, there's a really funny one. Do you know what the difference is between? I think I said this to you, Ellie. Between a crazy person and a genius. You remember the answer, Ellie? Their bank account. Okay, so then how to instill motivation into a student who's lacking it? There are, again, 5 different ideas here: autonomy, competence, belonging, self-esteem, and involvement and enjoyment. So, autonomy is to make the students feel as part of the process and they are capable of sorting themselves out, so to speak. So, ask students to set their own goals, but train them on how to do that. Right? And it goes back to SMART goals that we talked about 2 weeks ago. Give students alone time to work on their projects. Explain to students how the learning process works so they can be self-sufficient. That's going to give them motivation to overcome obstacles when they find them because they will feel equipped. Competence: be very clear with your expectations. In other words, don't set them up to fail. Be clear as to what you expect them to do, so it's not like this ocean of overwhelm that they will feel once they are alone at home trying to do this, but they don't quite know what you want from them, right? Test them often. More recitals, exams, weekly video performances, right? So like if you don't put on recitals, that's fine. You can film them playing a song, and it's a thing. It's not just whenever like they can play pretty well. It's a thing that they know it's coming. Like, oh, in 2 weeks' time we're gonna do our video, or in 2 weeks' time, you're gonna play for your parents because I'm gonna invite them in. And we're gonna do a little private show for them, whatever. Like in our case, we host recitals, right? So like to have a midterm recital, like a smaller one with less people, like just to make it as frequent as possible so they are always constantly engaging in activities that push them to, in our case, perform. And allow them to succeed often, meaning don't overreach with our goals. And it's so easy for us teachers to confuse being passionate about them getting better with being overly demanding. The line is so blurry, right? As to how do you know, like if you're just being lazy with them. Again, it goes back to the 3 mindsets of practice, right? So belonging, promote group and band projects, right? Get an ensemble together, get a band together. We have our band lab at the academy. We have guitar labs. We have all sorts of ensembles and groups and this and that. Often students collaborate with teachers for the recitals. Self-esteem: ask your students to share their own success stories and build bridges between their past successes in this case and their future challenges. If they are dealing with something now in the present or something that is coming that is going to be challenging, have them talk about situations that were challenging and that they succeeded at, and how they did that, and how exciting it was to eventually go over that hump and overcome the obstacle, blah, blah, blah. That's going to feed into their self-esteem because they will remember, oh, I've done this before. I've dealt with some, like obstacles and challenges before, and I managed. Okay, cool. Involvement and enjoyment. Connect with your students. There's a word lacking missing there, sorry. Connect with your students' interests. Ask them what they like. Right? Sometimes, again, we go into robot mode, like must teach music now, and we don't talk to them. Right? So ask them what they like and then use that information to, again, create bridges between what you're teaching and what they're doing. If they are a sports kid, use a ton of sports analogies. If they are into whatever they are into, there's going to be the element of passion that then you can steal and, and sort of adapt to what we're doing. And promote switch days and allow them to become the teacher. That's again enjoyable because it's a little bit silly, but it also has the educational factor because now they're trying to teach you and you're asking difficult questions and then you wink at them like, yeah, I'm being difficult on purpose. Do you do that, Craig?
Yeah, I do many times. It's a really good way of testing their understanding as well.
Yeah.
To see if the message has been received the way that you perceived it to be perceived, as it were. Yeah,
absolutely. I do it two ways. So I do it like asking them to explain it back to me, which is just okay, which is a form of that, and then I do the extremely silly way where I play the clueless, annoying, frustrating student, and they're trying to teach me something, and it's just I'm like, but I don't understand. You gotta teach me differently. You gotta explain me differently. I don't understand it. And it stretches them. I think it's hilarious to see them lose their patience very quickly, obviously, although they know what I'm doing. But they're like, but I just told you. And then I kind of take off the mask, so to speak, and I go like, now you understand why it's sometimes frustrating for me, eh? A little bit of empathy does wonders for them too. So let's see. Next slide. Speaking of empathy, there we are. I'm sure I didn't know that was next. So, developing self-awareness, developing reverse engineering skills, meaning show them the goal and then ask them to like, okay, how do we get there? Let's walk backwards. Where are we today? How do we get there? This is where we want to be. We want to play at 90 BPM. Again, I'll give you a very practical example. Paradiddle at 90 BPM, that's the goal. Okay, cool. Today we're playing it solid at 30. That's fantastic. We got 6 days to get to 90 BPM. That's pushy. Okay, how could we get there if we had to? So that's actually one of the questions I ask my students a lot is, if we didn't have fear of failure, how would we get there? If we don't have to be reasonable, we're all crazy people. It's fine. How would we get there? Let's just do the math. We are 60 BPM apart, aren't we? 6 days. That's 10 BPM a day. Is that unreasonable? And they start to see it like that. So that's the reverse engineering skills, right? They start to see like, 10 BPM a day. Right? And it becomes way more manageable, right? Student psychology. So for us teachers, again, like just to, we're kind of approaching a summary sort of vibe here because it goes back to understanding why they crash after 90 seconds and explaining to them. Like, you're not getting distracted. It's not, this is your brain working as it should. It's trying to send information back to the muscle memory. It's not there. It bounces. You make a mistake. Normal. Your brain's going to keep on trying to do that until your muscle memory catches it. So you got to just keep on going. That's how the brain works, right? So student psychology, understand the inner workings of the brain, and then explain your students how that works. And then leadership. We have to lead by example. If we can't explain things properly, how can we expect them to? Like when we ask them like, explain it back to me, and they're all rambling and just, like, nothing makes sense. Well, maybe we do that. Or maybe we kind of go on and on and on. We go on tangents. I speak a lot, but I try to stay like in that lane for me. And I said this 2 weeks ago as well. The speed. I actually said this to Eddie as well recently. The speed at which I speak. This is now a professional trait that I've adopted. That I work really hard to not do at home, but I often fail. Which is to create this avalanche of energy. So they can't tune out, right? I'm always charging at them. Unless they're playing, I'm talking, right? Or we are talking, right? But it's constantly action. There's no let me moving forward, like bulldozer style, right? It's just overpowering with a lot of energy and a lot of information. Even if it's overwhelming, I always tell my students, I know it's going to get overwhelming. Don't worry, I've got your back. Ask questions. Life is long. I'll say it again next week. You don't have to memorize anything. Just go with it. All right? And then the next one addresses body language, which I addressed last week. So I'm going to skip this one. We talked about that. So motivation, we've already talked a little bit about this. This sentence right here is on the walls of my music academy. The difficult becomes impossible only the moment you stop trying. So whenever students say like, it is impossible, I drop this one on them. I just go like, only if you stop trying, then yeah, absolutely impossible. Never gonna happen. Now, is it difficult? Yes, sir. Not impossible. There's degrees of of difficulties, right? So, how do I prepare them or set them up to succeed? I allow them to, or I teach them to do that themselves. So we plan first and foremost. We plan their practice session. We plan the week of practice, a month. Doesn't matter. We set goals up. We plan exactly how we're going to go. So now reverse engineering skills come into this. The planning comes into this. The table of standards and expectations that we talked about 2 weeks ago comes into this. Planning. And then prepare. Okay, now you have to prepare mentally for when it's going to get difficult. Again, the 3 mindsets of practice. Make sure the student knows that, hey, if you're struggling, ask yourself why. Is it too fast? How far into it did you start struggling? Like straight away? Then you're probably like in anxiety zone right now. We need to walk away from that. We need to slow it down to the point that you feel lazy and then you take again another step forward. Right? Practice. Sure, you got to do the reps. It is what it is. And then push. Whenever it starts to wobble, that's when you got to push another 5 minutes. Right? And the other thing that I remind my students a lot, once you get it, because they struggle, then they get it. Don't stop now. This is when you start feeding your muscle memory with it. Otherwise, all you've practiced was like 15 minutes of struggle and then 10 seconds of playing it well. Like, yeah, I did it. And then it stopped. So obviously the brain is going to retain 15 minutes of struggle, not the 5 seconds of success. It's just a game of numbers. So NLP, going back to these ideas of what not to say and what to say, the power of yet, right? When they say, I can't, you interject and you say, yet. I'm not good enough, yet. And again, I don't shy away from making it silly. I make it really obvious that I'm doing this little trick. Right? I'm not trying to be sneaky about it, so they know, like, I'm correcting you. I don't want you to speak like this. Right? It's not possible yet. I just add that little word at the end, and then I wink, wink. Right? This is what we should be saying. Like, again, going back to the idea, like, should we say, rather, can we say it better? Right? I can get this right yet, and so on and so on and so forth. That word, literally, that little yet can be added to virtually any negative self-talk and reframe it immediately, giving it a finite lifetime. Right? Whatever you're feeling now, it's going to go if you keep pushing. Right? What's that?
It's a magical word.
It's a magical word. It is, right? Like look at the list on the left side. I can't. It's very infinite. I just can't. Right? I'm not good enough. All fixed mindset stuff, right? I never get this right. I always get this wrong. Never, always. Right? Infinite words. absolutes. I never, and we know this even in our private lives. We have an argument with a wife. We go like, "You always do this." Now that's not the best way to go about it. It immediately puts the other person like, "Oh yeah, then check this out. I'll do it again." I always get this wrong, or I'll never actually use this, so I might as well forget about it. That's another one. That one, the last one is a bit of a rationalization that some people do when they struggle. They go like, "Well, I don't need this anyway. Like, why do I need to know my rudiments? I'm a rock drummer." And you respond, "Well, because Steve Smith, son. Because Steve Smith." You show him Steve Smith playing with Journey and playing rudiments, and then they will, hopefully get the point. You will need to rehearse this with your students. Don't wait until they are in crisis mode to intervene. Right? Instead, adjust their mindset even when they're not panicking and in the middle of a full-blown meltdown. And that's going to happen, but hopefully what you want to do is inject this useful information right, at the beginning, really, right? Like within the first few weeks when the learning curve is pretty steep because everything's pretty easy and accessible. That's when you inject like, oh, when you get stuff, let's try this. When you get that, let's try that. Don't wait until they immediately, cross their arms and go like, I'm done with this. This can't be done. It's going to be very difficult to get through to them right there and then. Eventually, these concepts will go in and they will become part of your students' neurological programming. Towards versus away from goals. I believe I mentioned this last time, where there's a difference between what do you want to achieve and what do you want to unlearn. Is your mindset of I want to get good, or is it I don't want to suck? The latter is toxic, right? You want to think positively and proactively, not retroactively and just reacting against something. And it's very often, it happens, right? Students, especially older students, who are now carrying a little bit of a chip on their shoulders, right? The student that was here 2 weeks ago, Derek, he came to me like that, and we talked about that. He came to me feeling like he tried to go on this jam session, and fundamentally he was made aware that he couldn't play, right? That he didn't belong there. And that created the away from mindset. I never again want to be in that situation. It's a very toxic mindset because it's so scary. You're always with that in your mind, like, oh, I'm sucking again. They're gonna mock me again, right? No. Towards goals, right? These are goals that we set with the clear intention of achieving something tangible and clear, a specific BPM or a song, just to make it very practical, right? Away from goals, these are goals that serve the purpose of steering you and your students away from bad habits of behavior, poor technique, and practice methods, right? In this case, that's a way of using away from goals, although I would still reframe that as towards goals. Like instead of saying like, oh, we want to lose this poor technique, we say we want to improve your technique and be able to do this, X, Y, and Z. So to sum it all up, it is really important that you guide your students through the process of finding noble, pursuable, and achievable goals. Right? Very, very important. And then help them with framing those goals correctly, mindset-wise. Be very attentive to how they are framing setting that goal up, if it is a positive thing or a negative thing. Who would know that here we are. Who would know that setting goals could be also toxic, right? Like it's always said that like set goals up, but if it's a chip on your shoulder that you've got, it can be very energy consuming. Okay, so Q&A. Let's get rid of this. We did an hour, so that's not bad. Be happy with that. So, any questions? Let's get into them.
About your students when they come with traumas like that, no, that they cannot play at a jam session or a specific style, but they have